Hey, my name is Greg Dixon, Storyvan TV, and last little episode, I told about my early days of becoming a drummer and playing in a band in Argyll called Illegra, which was Argyll backwards, and and then some of the adventures that we had with that. So, the next step in this was I believe we started in 1977 a band called Primal Scream, uh, and it was based on a book by a psychologist called Arthur Janov. And I wasn't really familiar with it, but one of the band members was, and he suggested the name, and that was Bill Napier-Hemy, and guitarist and vocalist extraordinaire. And I think how the band started, if I remember properly, I in high school I was in a symphonic band with a fellow named Jim Sprachlin who played trumpet, and I think he brought along um, Doug Culley-Struthers and Tom Dukowsky. And I think they had all played in the jazz band. I was in the symphonic band. I think they also played in the jazz band. They had some really good drummers playing in the jazz band then who were older than I was. And both of these guys were 1 year older than I was. And anyway, I guess probably there was some beer involved, and somebody said, let's form a band. So that ended up, we, that Bill Napier-Hemy joined. I think somebody had a friend named Brian Millar who played keyboards. Dan Power sang. He had a insanely high voice, as I recall. And Chris Grove was a friend, I think a friend of Jim's. I think some of us were going to Cap College at that time, and Cap College had this tremendous commercial music program. If you wanted to learn sort of classical stuff, you went to UBC. If you wanted to learn sort of jazz and blues and rock and more commercial stuff, Cap College had one of the best programs in Vancouver and maybe even Canada. It was just really tremendous. So there was a Chris Grove was part of that, and Chris played some guitar. He played some bass. He also played saxophone, the B flat saxophone, he would call it. He was also extremely funny, and anyway, this is our interesting group, and partially because of the influence of swing tunes and the jazz music program at Cap College, we ended up playing a tremendous range of things. So we played a lot of stuff like 1920s swing tunes. We played some sort of Chicago smooth jazz tunes. We also played some really old rock and roll things. Um, I think Dan Powers really liked Fleetwood Mac, so we played a number of Fleetwood Mac tunes. And Bill Napier-Hemy, very talented musician, was heading towards the Pointed Sticks, which later became a pretty well-known international punk rock new age band. And so his influence on the band was we did Bob Dylan, some Bob Dylan stuff, like All Along the Watchtower. We also did Lou Reed things and David Bowie things. So there's kind of a sludge rock component. And because we had a horn section, we also played. I think we did a set of Chicago horn tunes. So we were very diverse, and we played a diverse set. Like there was almost anything, any genre of music got played during our sets, and um, that resulted in us playing in the weirdest places. I think I mentioned in the first video that my brother Doug managed to get us a gig in Port Hardy playing at the Thunderbird Inn before we were old enough to drink there. He also got us a gig playing at a 150-foot minesweeper at the foot of Lonsdale. He knew this guy who owned the minesweeper. It was the guy had bought it probably at some military garage sale and fixed it up. with some living quarters, and we took a barge and brought all of our PA gear and musical gear and set it up on the deck, and we played, and we're having a great time for a few hours until the harbor patrol came and closed us down because I don't know if you've ever had experience of music on the water. It travels. I'm sure they could hear us in Vancouver. We are in the North Vancouver side of things, and they can hear it in Vancouver. And so we got shut down early. But a good time was had by all until that point. And so that was the one thing. We also ended up playing at a wedding for my good friend from elementary school, Brian Chapman, and his now wife Alison. I think they've now been married for something like 45 years. Maybe it's more. My math is not great at the moment. And we played that whole range of stuff, from the swing tunes to the rock. We did quite a lot of Rolling Stone stuff and some pretty raunchy stuff. And my friend Greg Richmond came along as the lighting guy and also played congas. And Greg, I think I recall him standing up on some chair, being quite expletive laden with a bunch. Anyway, but Brian and Alison's family didn't really seem to mind. They just got fired up in the moment of the things, but it was a little bit surreal. Anyway, a couple of interesting things about this band. One of the ones is I mentioned in the previous video that I had a lot of natural talent, but one of the things is I didn't practice enough. So this band as a whole had a bit of a problem with that. Is generally we'd all get together and start practicing, and the horn guys, Jim Sprachlin, and people who would show up at the last minute drunk already, and they said, let's go to the bar. So we'd end up going to the coach house and not really practicing. So we never ever were a particularly refined band. But that wasn't true of all of the band members. We had a very interesting thing, and Dave Cottrell, if he's going to listen to this thing, will came along on this. The band decided to have a vacation. We got a Brian Millar had this clinker built little boat powered by a Briggs and Stratton engine, and we called it the African Queen. And then we had a couple of canoes, and we all went to the Pitt Meadows, Pitt River estuary, put the boats in the water, and we paddled to find a place to camp. And in true band fashion, we had a little bit of food, but we basically had that little boat loaded up and the canoes loaded up with as much as beer and alcohol as we could load up. So that's what we had. And we ended up finding a spot. Was there's a lot of logging operations, and they had a cover. I think at one time it would normally be filled with a bunch of wood drying, lumber, and it had a concrete floor, and there were also tons of wood scraps there. So we built this big bonfire, and we're sitting around the fire. But what I'm going to say about playing is from the more or less, even from the time we got into the boat to the time we left a few days later, Bill Napier-Hemy and Chris Grove had an instrument in their hands and were singing songs. Basically, they probably knew 500 songs and were constantly playing and singing. And that's we were standing around the fire on this enclosure, playing and singing, and it started raining. It started raining really hard, and there was two canoes come up, and they were they were coming up, and the people looked pretty soaked, and they brought their canoes up on the shore, and we waved them up and brought them in, and they were standing around the fire. And of course, being sociable, we handed them a beer as they arrived. And anyway, next thing you know, there's a few more people and a few more people, and I think there ended up being about 20 of these people, young people. They all had a beer in their hands, and then their instructors arrived in in a canoe. So it was a high school trip for a canoe trip. And by the time the instructors came and they saw all of their students standing around drinking beer and singing these songs, and so they just grabbed a beer and joined in. So we had a tremendous amount of fun. But that instinct, or that habit of playing music constantly, took Chris Grove and Bill Napier-Hemy into a professional career. Chris, he was involved with a band called The Pulse, and then he also played with Pointed Six at some times, and then he had a band called Soul Crib later that was featured sort of more modern jazz kind of thing. But that that habit, just played music all of the time, really carried them. And uh, much later, I was introduced to somebody who had, with another band, had popped in, and they said that for the whole day, he had a guitar in his hand, playing. And then when I was introduced to him, he was playing with Lindsey Buckingham. So, it pays off. The rest of us, most of the people I played with never had that habit, and just to pick up and be playing music all the time. So anyway, that's my tale. So is if you practice and stick with it, and it was just their natural calling. It was just the instrument was just part of who they were. And I guess that's probably all I want to say about Primal Scream. Here is it was a really batshit crazy band. We had a lot of adventures. And anyway, stay tuned. We've got some more batshit crazy bands coming up, and some weird stories related to that. And anyway, talk to you soon, and see you in the